I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they sold the righteous for silver, and the poor for a pair of shoes. They pant after the dust of the earth on the head of the poor, and turn aside the way of the meek. Amos 2:6.
Amos claims to be a simple orcharder before he was called by God to be a prophet. So perhaps the sayings of Amos, because they're so condemning of the abuses of the rich, maybe the sayings of Amos were kept amongst the common people. They liked Amos. Amos was one of them. Whereas you get to a book like the Proverbs, and the Proverbs seem to be discussions about how to properly spend your money and how to be discreet in the company of the powerful. And so the Proverbs seem to come to us from different levels of life and different stations in life as much as it does from different time periods.
The Bible mentions the name of many books that were not canonized in the Old Testament. How many original texts were there? And will we ever find them? When we come back, our investigation will lead us along the baffling trail of the so-called lost books of the Bible. As the 3rd century before the birth of Christ dawns, the world that gave us the Bible has become a Greek world. Our quest for the earliest texts of the Holy Book takes us back to the time of a young general by the name of Alexander the Great. He has carved a path of victory through Asia Minor, from Syria, Egypt, and Persia to the borders of India, bringing Greek culture, language, and influence in his wake. Most of the books of the Old Testament have been written by now, from the book of Joshua to the book of Malachi. But with the exception of the first 5 books of Moses, none of them combine to form a Bible as yet. Various papyrus and parchment scrolls exist as disparate documents, not yet officially canonized or consolidated as the Hebrew Bible that we know today. However, many of the books have been loosely adopted by the Jews as integral elements of religious doctrine. In Egypt, Greek-speaking Alexandria, named for the young warrior Alexander, was once the site of a large Jewish community. There, many Jews readily embraced the culture and intellectual climate of the Hellenistic world. Although their religious texts were still in Hebrew, their home language had become entirely Greek.
You had to know Greek in addition to your own language. And so you're getting to a point where Jewish communities, say in Egypt, in large cities like Alexandria, didn't know Hebrew anymore. They only knew Greek. And so you needed a Greek version for use in the synagogue.
Tradition has it that King Ptolemy of Egypt also wanted a Greek version of the sacred Hebrew texts for reference in the new library at Alexandria. So, 72 Jewish scholars, 6 learned men supposedly descended from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, are brought to Alexandria from Jerusalem. Each man labors for exactly 72 days to produce identical Greek translations of the ancient texts. The final product becomes known as the Septuagint, referring to the number of scholars who worked on the translation. So, in the 3rd century BCE, the Hebrew Bible begins its arduous journey through the languages and cultures of the world.
The reason that the Septuagint is so important historically is it's the first time that Jews said out loud, as sacred as Hebrew is, it's more important that people read the Bible and know it than that it remain in that original vessel, the vessel of the Hebrew language. And it opened the door, far away as it may be, to those Bibles that you find in every hotel room in America in English, so that the average person moving around can read them, because it was the first statement that we don't care what language you speak, the message here is so important that you have to be able to read it.
The original copies of the Septuagint may well have been stored for safekeeping in the great Alexandrian library, a treasure trove of almost 1 million scrolls and documents from antiquity. But in the 47th year before the birth of Christ, the library is consumed by a fire, set by Julius Caesar's legions as they capture the city for Rome, destroying for all time a priceless chronicle of humanity's accumulated knowledge.
The question about the destruction of the Alexandrian library is one of those questions that probably would bring virtually any scholar you asked to tears because we think about what in the world could possibly have been lost there, and the mind is just boggled by the possibilities of what we had lost. Unnamed or unheard of prophets. Events from the life of the Jews in the Persian period, for example. What were some of the writings and adventures hinted at in a historian like Josephus, for example, that we might have had more information about in the libraries?
The documents translated into Greek were often referred to by the Hebrew term hasfarim, the books, the Greek equivalent being ta biblia, the books. This would later translate into the term we use today, ta biblia, the Bible. The Septuagint had laid yet another foundation stone in the development of the Holy Book, for the translation contained not only the 5 books of Moses, but many of the other texts in use at the time. Scholars had long puzzled over which early documents were eventually included in the officially sanctioned canon. They have pondered on which ones were excluded and on the reasons why some books were chosen in preference to others. There are also numerous so-called lost books, books which are mentioned but no longer appear in the Bible. Little is known about the actual process of the canonization of the Old Testament, but the decision as to which books were to be included in the Bible and which ones left out may have taken place within the 1st century after the birth of Christ. Those were turbulent times, with Jerusalem and the people under the yoke of Rome. While the rabbis debate which texts to include in the Hebrew canon, a fierce battle rages between Roman and Jew. The land has been laid waste, and isolated pockets of Jews fight bitterly against Roman occupation and aggression.
The surviving authorities, those who got through the war okay, met in the town of Yavne, and one of their first priorities was really to get this Holy Scripture defined and done. If you don't finally get this down, you run the risk of diluting or losing the whole heart of the people, which is the covenant with God and its relationship in history.
After much debate, the Hebrew texts are finally agreed upon, and the books of the Old Testament, as we have them today, are canonized. But in the cross-currents of history, other important events affecting the writing of the Bible as we know it were about to occur. A birth in a place called Bethlehem would spark the beginning of another set of writings and prompt an entirely different group of questions about who wrote the Bible. When we return, the birth of Jesus and the creation of a New Testament. The town of Bethlehem. Tradition tells us that it was in this humble place almost 2,000 years ago that the baby Jesus was born. The environment into which he came was dominated by imperial Rome. Judea, the land of the Bible, was now a province of a powerful empire that stretched across Europe, Asia Minor, and North Africa.